Hello my friends and welcome to the channel for another Darktide character build video. I've been spending some time in the lab and getting a bit experimental to try and come up with a close combat melee based Psyker build. Now why would I do this? Well, first off, I'm just a bit of a melee build stan. And I also just happened to roll a ton of different melee focused challenges at the Requisitorium this week, so I figured I'd do this and get those done. What I've come up with basically turns the Psyker from a sorcerer into a rogue, using Scryer's Gaze and Disrupt Destiny to massively buff damage, crit damage, and movement speed to juice up my melee weapon and a gun as the primary damage sources instead of the blitz and the staff. Overall, I can definitely say this build is pretty fun to play. You end up stacking so many damage and crit bonuses that the damage output of the dueling sword becomes kind of hilarious. The crit bonuses also work wonders on fast-firing guns like the Shredder auto pistol that I'm using, turning it into an awesome little pocket rocket. I don't think you can quite go pure melee, especially on higher difficulties, just because of the low health pool on the Psyker. But if you swap back and forth between the sword and the Shredder depending on the situation, you can keep up a pretty impressive damage output. However, I won't act like I've reinvented the wheel here. The Psyker is squishy, you get one shot by crushers, and one wrong move in a horde can leave you down and out pretty quick. This build is fairly entertaining to play, but you have to be fast and keep up non-stop dodging and attacking to stay alive, so it's not exactly the safest build or the most consistent at high difficulties. But that being said, I like it, so I'm going to share it. First, I'll talk about the talents and then get into the loadout and curios, but right here at the start of this section, I'll leave up an image of the entire talent tree, so if you just want to take a screenshot, set it up, and get back to the game to try it out, well, here you go. First up, since this build is a crit-focused setup, I take metal to get toughness back on crits, and that stacking movement speed buff is pretty nice. Next, I take warp expenditure, which gives back toughness based on peril generated. This build basically never quells peril, so I don't take most of the other peril-based perks, except for the next one, Battle Meditation, which just gives a passive 10% chance to quell peril after a takedown. After this, I go across to the left and pick up Brain Rupture as my blitz ability on this build. 99% of the time, I'm not actually using Brain Rupture in combat, but you can give yourself a 10% chance to activate Brain Rupture on hit by taking the Kinetic Flayer talent. This basically means that anytime you hit an enemy with a sword or a shot from a gun, there's a 10% chance they instantly take the full damage of Brain Rupture. This can occur once every 15 seconds, and it's pretty satisfying when it happens at the right time. Next, I take Psykinetics Aura for the ability cooldown bonus, Inspiring Presence for extra toughness regen, and then I go into Prescience as my Aura ability for the flat 5% crit chance bonus. After this, I take both Empathic Evasion and Anticipation. This allows you to passively dodge ranged attacks after landing a crit, and increases the iframe duration of your normal dodges, allowing you to dodge more often as well. After this, I go into Scryer's Gaze as my combat ability, and I take the Precognition, Endurance, and Warp Speed modifiers. Scryer's Gaze sends you into a trance that boosts your damage, gives you 20% crit chance, and adds a stacking damage bonus for every second that you spend in Scryer's Gaze. With Precognition, you also gain a second stacking finesse damage bonus while in Scryer's Gaze, and any weak spot kills adds more of both stacks instantly. The other two modifier talents add 20% movement speed and 20% toughness damage resistance to your character while you're in Scryer's Gaze. So essentially, the ability just adds a massive stat boost to your character. You constantly generate peril while in Scryer's Gaze, but since this build doesn't really use peril for anything, that doesn't really matter. You basically want to constantly be in Scryer's Gaze whenever it's available for the extra damage, crit, and movement speed. Those damage bonuses linger for 10 seconds after the ability ends as well. So as long as you focus on using it constantly in combat every time it's on cooldown, you can benefit from the bonuses most of the time. Moving on down the talent tree, I take Kinetic Deflection, which makes blocking attacks generate peril instead of costing stamina. This sounds kind of meh, but then take a look at this for a second. I'm a Psyker and I'm tanking a Demon Host on Heresy difficulty. That's kind of crazy. I wouldn't advise you to try and become the team tank with this build, but when shit hits the fan, you can kind of clutch up against monstrosities. Next, you get a little movement speed bonus, and then True Aim, which makes your next ranged attack an automatic critical hit after landing 5 weak spot hits. For my keystone ability on this build, I decided to go for Disrupt Destiny, which I'm essentially using as just another way to build up stacks that supercharge my character's stats and make me faster and hit harder. This ability marks targets for you around the battlefield, and killing a marked enemy regens 10% toughness, increases your movement speed by 20%, and adds a stacking damage bonus that increases your damage, crit damage, and weak spot damage for 15 seconds. With the Lingering Influence talent, that becomes 30 seconds, so you have a lot more time to benefit from the damage bonus, and it makes it easier to prolong it because it resets every time you get a new stack. Cruel Fortune makes weak spot kills add 2 stacks, so you can max it out faster, and then Purloin Providence makes killing marked enemies have a chance to quell peril, which in turn can make Scryer's Gaze last for longer periods of time. I found this one in combination with Scryer's Gaze to be quite entertaining. You can build up to 75 stacks of damage and crit bonus between those two abilities, and you gain up to 40% extra movement speed when taking down marked enemies while Scryer's Gaze is active, so you can really zoom around the battlefield pretty quickly. After this, I take a few dips in the bottom part of the talent tree to finish it off. First, I go for Warp Rider, which increases damage up to 20% based on your current peril, and guess what? You're always going to be at high peril because of Scryer's Gaze, so that's just free real estate, baby. Finally, I just dipped my last points into the Puppet Master talent, which increases coherency radius so I can benefit from the toughness regen and other stats that my allies give me even when I'm a little bit out of position. That covers it for the talents, so let's take a look at my loadout next. For a melee weapon, I've been using the Dueling Sword, and specifically the Maccabian Mark IV and Mark V Dueling Swords. From what I understand, the Mark IV Dueling Sword is considered overall better than the Mark V, but I had a Mark V with really nice stats on it, so that's what I've been using most of the time. But if you want to min-max, from what I've read on forums and seen on YouTube, the Mark IV is better, so you might want to give that one a shot. For blessings, I've been running my sword with Precognition and Riposte, which adds crit chance and crit damage after a successful dodge. This build has multiple things that make dodging easier, so these bonuses proc often and it works pretty well. However, if I could find one with the Uncanny Strike blessing to add rending on weak spot hits, I would absolutely run that one to make armored kills easier. Next up for my ranged weapon, I'm running the IS Mark III Shredder Auto Pistol, which is basically a little SMG with a 50+ round mag. This thing fires fast, you move fast with it, and it reloads fast. It's a great close range weapon because of this, and when you get the stacking damage boosts from all your talents, you can pull this thing out and take down some pretty tough enemies with surprising speed. I've had the Columnus Mark V autogun recommended for this slot as well by Twitch viewers, but I haven't tried it myself, so I can't say if it's much better. For blessings, I just have Pinning Fire and Raking Fire on here because that's what it rolled when I upgraded it, and I didn't really want to spend any more resources on it. If I had them unlocked, I would swap out one for Cavalcade Fire for the crit bonus and Speed Load for faster reloads. Now for Curios on this build, I tried to stack on a few extra wounds so that when I get smoked by a crusher, I don't permanently lose a third of my health. I also put on combat ability regeneration on all my Curios to get Scryer's Gaze back as fast as possible, and then I added damage resistance from gunners and snipers. And that more or less covers my whole setup for this melee/gun based close combat crit damage Psyker build. I had a lot of fun playing this one, and I'm going to keep it in my back pocket for doing melee challenges as a Psyker, or for when I want to farm some cash and run heresy missions and don't feel like running the magic builds. I hope you enjoy the build if you try it out, and let me know how it works for you. If you have another melee Psyker build that you use, I'd be keen to hear about that as well, so let me know down in the comments. Thanks for checking out the video. I've got links to my Twitch stream and Discord server down below for anyone interested. And until next time, stay safe out there in the Hive City.